going to start with this question. Have you ever felt completely helpless when it comes to speaking up for your student, your kid, someone you care about? Maybe you sat in an IEP meeting and you felt like your concerns were not being heard, or maybe you've wondered why the PTA is not offering events where you feel included or that are offering any kind of accommodations for your kid. You want to do something, but you're not quite sure what. The reality is that we've all been there, and we will end up there again. The landscape of education and PTA, it seems like it's constantly changing with different, not just like local leadership within the PTA or the school, but when it comes to our school board, our legislators, all the way up to national things. And so we're constantly playing catch up to figure out what is the best move and how we can help. But today's workshop, we're going to take some look at a few things that'll be a step forward, at least in the right direction of what we can get going into. So again, many of you've been to workshops before, and I appreciate you coming back. Ms. Will Haynes, I'm the Vice President of the Hillsborough County Special Education, HC SEPTA. I'm also a local secretary and ESC parent rep at Schwarzkopf Elementary School, and a member of the HCC, PTA Advocacy, and Legislative Committees. And this presentation is a joint effort from HC SEPTA, HCC PTA, and the Superintendent's Advisory Council for the Education of Students with Disabilities. There's a lot of people working together to help make sure that all of us are equipped and encouraged and supported when it comes to advocating for our kiddos. And we're excited to share some strategies today about how you, as an ESE parent, an educator, an advocate, can step into leadership roles that can make a real difference in your school and in your district. So the first two sessions in this series, the Spring ESE Workshop Series, really dealt with PTA things. This one, we're going to get a little bit outside of PTA. We are going to focus on PTA as well. But remember, PTA is and has always been an advocacy organization. That's how it was started, and that's what is at our core. Our goal today is to help you feel more confident advocating for your child, not just at the school level, but within the PTA, at the school, even in the school district. Your voice matters. And we're going to talk about how you can use it to create lasting change that benefits not just your kid, but all the kids. So first, we should really define advocacy. There's tons of presentations out there about this. We hear this term a lot, and there's a lot of different ways we talk. So the basic question I would start with is, what is advocacy? And are you already an advocate? We often think that advocates is like this term is reserved for these big heavy hitters. You know, they're on TV or they lead these giant organizations, they have these giant networks. And that doesn't apply to us because, you know, we're just parents or we're just volunteering at the school or something like that. But if you've ever asked for an IEP meeting or an accommodation for your kid, if you've ever raised concerns with a company that maybe you do business with, or if you've even sent your food back because it wasn't cooked, then you are an advocate. Because an advocate is simply speaking up. And what we're talking about today, we're talking specifically about speaking up for our children, our children's needs. But it goes beyond our own child, because when we bring concerns and solutions to leadership and to change makers, they can benefit the entire school, they can benefit a class, the district, the state, the country, and so on. Because we're seeking solutions through direct action. And I want to make sure that's clear that advocacy isn't complaining. Sometimes it feels like it, sometimes it might even look like it, but the true goal of advocacy is to then bring solutions so we can see change happen. It's not just complaining for the sake of complaining, it might be complaining for the sake of change. And ultimately, we're strengthening our school communities through parent involvement. And that's a big, big piece of this. We know that our schools, in Florida especially, like funding is not high on the list of priorities in our state and even across the country. And so that partnership with parents is vital, is super important, that we're coming in and helping in some of those areas and advocating, because if we're not doing it, a lot of these things are not going to happen. There's a good chance to remind us about PTA's mission to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. And I emphasize all every time I say this, because especially those of us who are in the ESC world, our students, our kids have special needs, support needs, they're gifted, or anyone else that falls into those categories, They're included in this. Advocating for all children includes our kids as well. And until we advocate for all children, we are not fulfilling PTA's mission. So ESC leadership matters. It makes a big difference. So ESC families, we face challenges that other families may not quite understand. Things like navigating IEPs or requesting accommodations, finding supportive school environments, and so on and so forth. And it's not that other parents don't care. It's not that they are exclusively, keeping us out of the mix. It's just they don't know any better. They don't have to deal with some of the things that we deal with. An example that I'd love to give, I've probably already told it before, but I'll tell it again. Last year, I was just getting started volunteering at the beginning of the school year, and I'm a photographer, so I was doing photos for the yearbook and events for the PTA. And we have an event early in the year where they have the high school drum line comes down and they play the drums as kids are coming into school. It kicks off our big fundraising season. And they asked me, hey, can you come photograph this? I said, absolutely, that would be a lot of fun. And they said, we'll be here at 6:45. And I said, all right, well, I can't drop my son off to school until 7:10. That's when they'll take him. And they said, oh, well, just bring him with you. I said, bring him with me where? The drum line is lined up on the street where all the cars are coming and dropping kids off. It's going to be really loud. And she's like, he can just stay with you. And I kind of laughed a little bit. And she doesn't know any better, but at that time, especially, my son has some sound sensitivities, so the drum line is not going to be fun for him being out there, and it's very loud. And then on the main street, if he is to be overwhelmed and he decided to leave the situation, he's in a very dangerous position. So it's not a possibility for us. I can't bring him and just sit him down in the grass and say, stay here. I was like, I'll be there at 7:10. I'll be the first one in line to drop him off. And then as soon as he goes in, then I'll come and photograph. And it's fine. And once I explain that, they're like, oh yeah, that's... So it's not that they were trying to exclude us or put my son in any kind of danger, but those parents, they don't have to think about those kinds of things, because when they come to an event at 6:45, their kid sits with them, or they help, or they do something else. With my son as a kindergartner, it's just not happening. And so that's why representation and leadership really matters, because if people aren't thinking about those kinds of things, we have to bring that to their attention. How can we expect inclusivity and having accommodations and just a basic general care about bringing in all these students if no one is bringing up those concerns? That perspective they're often missing from decision making. And when ESC parents are part of the PTA and other leadership structures, organizations, councils, and things like that, those perspectives are considered more when they're planning events, when they're setting school policies, when they're deciding how funds are being used. Inclusive leadership leads to better, more supportive schools for everyone. And that's something I emphasize even with the PTA at my school. When we're doing things that benefit the ESE families, like communicating more details about our events, everyone appreciates that. Everyone wants to know the details of what's going on. It's not just me. So it benefits everyone. And it really strengthens the inclusivity, and it gives us better outcomes overall. But we should consider some of the barriers to leadership that ESE families run into. And it's not just ESE families. These are going to sound familiar to you regardless. So some of the things that we run into is like lack of time, right? Many ESE parents and other parents are already stretched thin. We're talking therapy appointments, doctor's appointments, social groups. They might have, other kids. They may have other kids with special needs that have those appointments. They may not have support like grandparents or someone that live with them or live nearby that can watch the kids. And babysitters may not be as easy to come by when your kid has special needs. And so making school meetings, all those kind of things can be difficult. And so they already feel overwhelmed because there's so much going on. So that's a barrier that we have to consider. Feeling unqualified, right? You may feel like you don't know enough about how the school system works, about how PTA works, about any of those things. You may say, I don't really know enough to be a leader in this role. But here's the cool thing. You know more about your child's needs better than anyone else. You are already qualified to advocate and lead for your child, which is going to benefit other children as well. Lack of inclusivity, right? PTA doesn't feel welcoming. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. That is a very common feeling. And I truly believe it is not on purpose. But if you don't see yourself represented in leadership in these different organizations, then it's easy to feel like you don't. I love to do, it's mine to do what I call like a PTA audit. So there's a number of PTAs I follow on Facebook just to see like what people are doing, what cool ideas are out there, what flyers are they using. And occasionally you look through and say, wow, they use the same 3 volunteers in every photo that they post. Now this is probably because they don't know if they can post pictures of other people, or those are the people who show up and so they get the pictures the most. But when you see the same 3 people in every photo, you start thinking that there are only 3 people that are allowed to volunteer and allowed to do the work. And I'm not in that group, so why am I going to try? Right? That's not necessarily on purpose, but if we're not paying attention to how we're presenting our organization, we may exclude people just on perception. There's fear of speaking up. Like, what if I say something and no one listens? Is it even worth it to bring up this issue or to advocate for this thing? And if you've faced resistance before, and I know you have, it can feel defeating, and you put a lot of time into and maybe even a lot of energy to raise a concern, and you feel like no one's listening. Why am I going to do this? And missed opportunities, right? We're not always clear how things work. It's not clear how to get involved. How do I join the PTA? How do I get on the ball? What other organizations are out there that can help me get into leadership roles? Like, what opportunities? We're the 7th largest school district here in Hillsborough County in the country. It is huge. From corner to corner, we're talking a good hour-and-a-half drive, right? Like, so there are things happening all over the place. How do we keep track of what's going on? So these barriers are real for all parents and specifically for ESE parents, but they're not permanent. So we're going to explore a little bit how to overcome them through leadership. And by doing it, we're just going to educate everyone here of what opportunities are out there and kind of how to get involved, how it works. It's going to be kind of a condensed version of that. So there may be more nuance to each of those organizations, but you have a pretty good feel of what's out there and some steps that you can take. And our county, our school district is full of amazing advocates. That is hands down the truth. I have met some incredible people who their kids are graduated already, or they may not have ESE kids, but they're still in the trenches with those who do, fighting that fight. But no one is going to fight for your kid the way that you will. And so that's why we need all of us to join together to advocate and to be in these leadership roles. So leadership pathway. So how do we turn the advocacy you're already doing? Remember, you're advocating. I'm betting you came to this workshop. That tells me you're already out there speaking up for your kid or for others. We're going to talk about 4 different organizations that are here in Hillsborough County that are structured opportunities where parents can engage with the school and the district. The Parent-School Partnership Program, and we're going to go into each of these in more detail. School advisory committees at your local school, the Superintendent's Advisory Committee, and PTA. So we've talked a lot about that'll be best for last. But each of those gives you a different kind of opportunity, and all of them looking for parents to get involved, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if those barriers are real and it doesn't look like they're looking for people. They are. And sometimes you have to kind of push your way in because that's just the nature of it. But I can promise you, once you get in, you're typically very welcome. Now that may not be true in every one of these, because sometimes you get people in charge who it's a power trip for them. But generally speaking, they need us and they want us to jump in. So let's get started with the Parent-School Partnership. This one for me is actually kind of new. It's been around for a while, and I'm currently in the class. And so far it's been really fun. So this is typically a 12-week program. This is run through Hillsborough County Public Schools. There are versions of it that are only 8 weeks. They play with it each session, so it could be a little bit different each time. And it is designed to give parents the tools and knowledge to become more effective and becoming more effective advocates, which is not a word, and leaders. And what it does is each week it goes through case studies and laws, and we go through the Florida Department of Education website and the Hillsborough County School website, and we're looking at how the school district operates. We're looking at parents' rights, how to work with teachers, administration, the school board, and so on. Ultimately to create better outcomes for students and to create this partnership. Graduates of this program, the PSP program, can go on to serve. I mean, you don't have to do this, but usually after you do this program, you feel really good. So PTA boards, school advisory councils, district level advisory councils, all kinds of things like that. And if nothing else, it gives you a really good feel for how our school district and in our state, how it's set up, and then kind of how to navigate some of the different things. And so far, we're only 3 weeks into this session, and we've looked at IDEA. We've looked at some court cases that made English as a second language a thing, that gave rights to women, all kinds of stuff within education throughout history. And there's a lot of cool stuff coming. There are 2 field trips that are optional, where they visit a couple different places. And at the end, if you're someone who is motivated by certificates, you get a certificate. There's a little graduation ceremony, and it is signed by the superintendent himself. So you can hang on the wall, feel really good about it. But it's especially great if you feel like you have no idea how the school system works where you are. And it is confusing. I feel like there's a master level graduate course on public education, but since we don't have time for that, this is a great way to do it. There'll be links at the end you can take a picture of, but you can see here there's a link or you can just search for Parent-School Partnership, Hillsborough County Public Schools, or you can contact Jessica de la Prida about when the next session is. And they do offer this in English and in Spanish. So that's a really nice perk, is that we can get more people included in that as we go. Moving on is the School Advisory Committee. So this is something that should exist at every school. Now, I can speak from personal experience. This is not something that is advertised very well, so you may have never heard of it. Maybe you have. Even at my school, it's not something that is really pushed a whole lot. Now, part of that is because the PTA and the school work together. Like we've really established a good relationship. So the PTA board is kind of the SAC, but not necessarily. There is a separate SAC, and I didn't know it existed until this year when I found out another parent was on it. I was like, well, tell me more. What is this about? This is a group, so it involves parents and teachers. They advise the principal and staff on school improvement plan, so the SIP. It's supposed to reflect the diversity of the school, and there should be a majority of members not employed in school. So even if there are administrators, parents. So what happens is they may ask the parents that are already involved if they're happy to sit in, or the parents say no, we'll just kind of come in and do things. But this is something that if you want to be part of that, I would say just ask your principal, ask your homeroom teacher, whoever your student is working with. Hey, we have a SAC. How can I join? And then that should get you started. This gives you direct line to school leadership, and it gets you a seat at the decision-making table. And if nothing else, it gives you a clear idea of what's going on behind the scenes. You'll be able to go to his website. Every school in Hillsborough County has a website. They're not all amazing, but some of them are. They give you information. You're going to spend a lot of time on there, but you will find the school improvement plan on the website, and there may be information about their advisory committee as well. So I encourage you, especially if you're not sure again how things work, contact your teacher. Now this year, there may only be a few meetings left, or big decisions have already been made, but definitely, you could still say, hey, can I attend to see how it works? I'd like to join for next year, and take a seat at the table. And that will give you a really good feel for what's going on at the school. Next, we get into the Superintendent's Advisory Council for the Education of Students with Disabilities. It is a big name, and there's no acronym for it that makes any sense. Yeah, it doesn't work. This is an organization, they meet and focus specifically on ESE issues at this district level. So this made up of parents, educators, and community members. And they provide direct feedback to the superintendent, to our district ESE staff on district policies and programs and different things like that. This is when I'm on the council. I know some other people on this call are also on the council, but the beauty is you don't have to be on the council to come to the meetings. Typically, they meet the first Friday of every month. April is an exception. That one's going to be on April 11th. And then the last meeting on May 7th is a big one, and that's when we present our reports. So the superintendent will be there. Typically, he's there in person. There has been times when he will come virtual, just depending on his schedule. If you go to the website, the link is there. It can help you. You can sign up as a guest, which will get you the emails about it. And the location can kind of change from month to month. Sometimes it's at like the children's board office. Sometimes it's in a school board office. Sometimes it is. We've met at like the one of the transition centers in town, things like that. So you can't assume it's at the same place every single time. But one of the things I love most about this, there's two. One is you can build relationships with key personnel throughout the district. Usually we have the ESE director, Shannon Lesprance, is typically in attendance. So she's the director for ESE for the district, for our school district. And you get to talk to her, you get to meet her, you get to hear what's going on in that case. And those kind of relationships are key. They're important because when the time comes and you have a question, that may be someone you can reach out to and get a direct answer. There is a hierarchy of what you're supposed to do, but sometimes it's nice to just like, hey, I'm going to see Sharon on Friday. I'm just going to ask her real quick about this thing. And it works out really well. You can also learn about different opportunities throughout the county because the people who represent this council, we've got people from USF CARD, the Center of Autism and Disabilities. We've got people from the McDonald Training Institute, it's a transition center. We have parents, we have people from community health, there's a lawyer, there's IEP advocates. I mean, there's people who are connected to and care about ESE things throughout the district. So it's a really great group and there's so much going on in Hillsborough County. It is impossible to keep track of it all. So these meetings are great because typically anyone who has an event coming up, whether it's like a Special Olympics program or something like that, they're gonna share it with them. And this year we've been doing little presentations from different groups in the district at the start of the meeting so we can learn about different opportunities. So the Special Olympics did a presentation that was really cool. And so you can see those. And then the other part that I like about these is we have committees or subcommittees or whatever, I don't know what status they're at. And this year we had, typically there's 3. So the ESC parent rep is one of those, and that's a partnership with ACC PTA and the HC SEPTA, which is designed towards getting those ESE parent reps on PTA boards across the district, which is a big piece of family engagement. But there's also some that are dealing with collecting data and analyzing data with best practices in inclusive education. There's some other ones that are analyzing data. And then this year, they're kicking off an advocacy committee that'll be working with the district directly. So that is something most likely next year will be in place. And again, you don't have to be on the council to be on one of the committees. And if you're interested in being on the council, come to these next 2 meetings because in May, you can put your name in the hat. And they're typically looking for people to do it. So I think everyone, so far, the only ones that I've been a part of, everyone who put their name in got on. You don't get any perks or anything from it, but looks good on your resume. I don't know. But that's the key thing. So this is a great group to come into and see what is going on around the district and building relationships. Because building relationships is one of the cornerstones of advocacy. All right, the big one. Local PTA leadership. Obviously, HC SEPTA, we are a PTA. We're not a local PTA. We're not attached to a particular school, but we are considered a local unit. We're not a district unit, even though we try to serve the whole district. And PTA leadership is a natural next step in advocacy and local leadership. And so each year, and if you're like me, you knew nothing about this, and some of it doesn't make sense until you learn it. So I'm going to give a brief idea of what PTA leadership could look like. So every year PTAs have nominating committees that look for new board members, and ESE voices are often underrepresented in PTAs because of all the barriers that we've already mentioned, but they shouldn't be. And I can tell you from personal experience, when you change that, some really cool things can happen at your school. But you don't have to jump into a role as an officer right away, right? That can feel a bit overwhelming, and especially it feels like their PTA is like everyone is there 40 hours a week, and like, how am I going to do that? It's not how it should be. Some parents just have that flexibility or that kind of control issue. But you can also start with joining a committee or a volunteer position. You can just be an active member. You can be a committee chair. You can be a committee member. So what is kind of supposed to happen, and it's going to vary a little bit from local unit to local unit, even though there's kind of an outline of what's supposed to. So most units are going to hold elections April or May. Now, some of them might do it in March. It's a little early, but typically April or May, they're going to have an election for the next year's board members. I would say check with your local PTA for specifics. They'll have a general meeting, they'll have an election. But before that election, there's a nominations committee. So this is a committee that's typically appointed and created earlier in the year. So you may remember the last HC SEPTA meeting, we put together our nominations committee, who's at work right now, recruiting and evaluating people to be the next year's HC SEPTA board. And the cool thing about it's nominations, you can nominate yourself. I like to call it an application because it's more likely you're just going to put your name in the hat versus someone else doing it for you. But both are okay. In a nominations committee, and this could be really any member can be on this committee that it's voted on and appointed all this, the process. The president is the only person who cannot be on the committee. So anyway, the nominations committee, they're going to look through all the applications. They're going to track people down and ask them to apply. They'll hold interviews. They'll look over social media posts, make sure you're a good fit, whatever it is, whatever extent that they do. And then they'll create what we call slate. And that's kind of like a recommendation for the officers. And then when they come to the general meeting with the election, they'll say, this is the slate that we've presented. These are the names and the positions. And the membership basically says yes or no. They vote to approve it. Now, if you're not selected for the slate, they can what we call run from the floor, which means they're actually going to vote and decide this person or this person. And then when that happens, they give everyone 2 minutes to kind of give a speech and then they vote. So it's a little different than what we are used to in our country in terms of voting. There's not necessarily like a campaign season, although there might be people who are telling others, hey, I'm thinking of running or something like that. What happens at a lot of local units is that whoever puts their name in probably gets a position because often there's not a lot of people fighting for them. Now, some PTAs, it's a huge drama-induced craziness when it comes to the elections, and that's a different story. So often what happens is the slate is just accepted. Now, it doesn't always happen, but often that's the case. Again, you can check with your PTA for specifics, ask people who are on the board, how did it work for them? And that's okay. So if you decide to run for an office, I mean, right now, you might still have time to get your name in the hat. Now, you might have missed the deadline for nominations, and that's okay. And if you're not voted in, maybe you decide to run for an officer position, you want to be president, you want to be treasurer, you want to be a vice president of something, whatever it is. And each PTA will have like secretary, treasurer, president, but they can have vice presidents, and those will be titled different things depending on your school. So it might be like a VP of communications or of membership or ways and means or events or outreach or whatever. So you have to see what your local unit has. So if you decide to run and you don't get in, that's okay. Sometimes people who are in position they'll stay there. Now you can only have one position for two years. So if you're president last year, you can be president this year if you're selected, but you can't be president again next year. And that's the difference between like a PTA, which is a national organization, and like a PTO or another kind of parent teacher organization, some kind of group where they may have different rules. So if you know people who are like, I've been president for 6 years, it's not a PTA, or it's a really poorly run PTA. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. You can apply to be on a committee. So what is supposed to happen is the new board would then put out requests for people who are interested in being on committees or committee chairs, and the board would appoint those committee members with like a majority approval. What often happens at local PTAs is they do the board selection and committees at the same time. Because the group of people who are interested is usually kind of small, and so they kind of just make all those decisions at once. And it may vary a little bit, but that's a great opportunity for you to join a committee or even put your name in to be a committee chair. And what these committee chairs do, it depends on the exact committee. There might be a committee who does your spirit wear, which is like selling t-shirts and hats and stickers or whatever for your school. That's something that's going to happen year round, most likely. And so joining that committee is a good way to get in and prove yourself as reliable. If you've got a background in marketing, maybe you have some new ideas that you want to share. Maybe you're just like a workhorse and you're happy to go in and fold t-shirts and sort things. That's a great position. There might be a committee that runs your fun run every year, a committee that puts together your school dance, or a committee that just does engagement with families or the community. any of those committees, you could be on that group that helps plan those events. That's a great way to get your foot in the door. Committee chair, another great thing. And there is a path of leadership that could exist where you're on a committee. Next year you become a committee chair. The next year you become a board member, and you just continue growing in that sense. It doesn't work that way for everyone. Said I was just volunteering last year, and then I joined the board this year, and I'm slated to be president for next year. Not by choice, but that's just how it works. We don't have a very big PTA, and we have very few people who are interested. So we're working on that as well. Your PTA might be huge. There's some schools that have 1,000 members in their PTA. They have this huge board with committee chairs, and it might take a little bit more work to get involved in that. So I know that's a lot. If you've never done PTA before, you might be like, okay, maybe this makes a little bit more sense. If you've done PTA, you might think, Will, you did not explain that very well. I'm telling you, the more people I talk to, the more I find out it is not as standard as it probably should be. But generally speaking, that's kind of what you're looking at. So the bottom line is it may not be too late to run for a board position this year at your local PTA if you're interested and able. And if that's not, you don't have the bandwidth for that, that's fair. I would encourage you, join a committee of some kind. And we're going to talk more about a special committee that you should try to help form at your school, but we're not quite there yet. But we're going to go on. There is higher level PTA leadership as well. So we have a county council. This is like the district-wide PTA. I wouldn't say that they're in charge of local PTAs, but they kind of are, and they help train. They help keep local units organized and compliant with the rules. And they have various committees and subcommittees, and they do advocacy and legislative, and they have military families, and they have fundraising, and they have all these different groups that they work with as well. You'll want to have some experience at the local PTA level before you apply for something at the council level. That's not always going to be the case, but it's going to make a big help. So when you're working at the council level, now you're impacting what happens at local levels. So this is a great place to kind of move up if you're interested in that kind of thing. Now for this year, that slate has already been announced, and their general meeting with the voting is next month. But they will have their committee applications go out anytime between the end of the school year and the beginning of next year, depending on when the new board does that. And I encourage you, put your name in the hat, just even to be on a committee. You don't have to be the chair, but join a committee because you're going to get a real feel for how things work. And you can help plan some pretty cool events. Last year, I randomly joined like the Reflections Planning Committee for the banquet for that. Didn't know what it was, but I was like, yeah, I'll do that. We did a health and wellness. That was really fun. Again, I had no clue what it was. So I just signed up for stuff because I was like trying to get a feel for what's out there. HC SEPTA, that's us, the Hillsborough County Special Education PTA. We are currently seeking new board members for the 25-26 school year, so next school year. And that application is available on our website, hcsepta.org/nominations. If you're interested, and we're still a new organization. This is our first year. So there's a lot of stuff that we're still figuring out and working through. So it may not be quite as organized as some other PTAs, but we are focused and we are driven, and we have some really cool things coming down the pipeline. And of course, you can keep moving up. Florida PTA, so the statewide PTA, they have different positions. Again, you want to have experience. And now at this level, you're getting much more competitive. So I mentioned at the local level, the slate is usually just going to get approved as it is. If Florida, you're going to have 10 people run from the floor. So it is a true election. But they have different committees, they have task force, they have trainings. So again, something else that you can get involved with to learn more about how this kind of leadership works. And what should happen as you move up from a local PTA to a district PTA to a state PTA, or even, I didn't put it on this one, but there's national PTA, and they also have things. You're now dealing with a kind of a bigger piece of what you're advocating for and what you're doing. So national PTA and state PTA, they're working on actual policy within the government. Like they're going to Tallahassee and meeting with our state senators and talking about actual priorities at that level. National PTA, they have, anti-smoking resolutions and things like that. So there's that big issue things out there where the local PTA, like, you're hosting a bake sale so that you can put on a really fun event for your kids. At state level, they're not doing bake sales, right? They're not doing spirit nights necessarily. They're doing bigger things, but it gives you a pretty clear line. And so if you're, you might someone who's, I'm happy working at the local level and impact my kid directly, but then you can find I can kind of work my way up and have a bigger reach as we go. And that's a fun way to do it. And in fact, my start was with joining the ESE subcommittee through the HCCPTA last year. And by doing that, got a feel for how things work, and that led to helping form the HC SEPTA. I don't do anything at the state or national level. It's too much for me. But for you, it might be something you're like, yeah, I would aspire to that because that's within my wheelhouse. Now, I talked about a special committee that you could possibly help form and chair or be part of. And that is our ESE Parent Rep program. I've talked about this in every one of these workshops, and our next workshop next month is going to be specifically about this program and how you can get it started, what strategies we can use to get your PTA on board, and if you have the PTA on board, what you can do to get things moving for the start of the school year. So that's all next month. But for now, this is the idea behind this is that you have someone who is a formal liaison for the ESE families within your local PTA. The idea behind it is that there is a committee. And I don't call it a committee. We call it, our school, we call it a community. We call it the ESE parent community or ESE community, but it's a committee. And this is someone who should be coming to board meetings, event planning meetings, and they're just simply asking questions like, how can we make this event more inclusive? Remember the last session, autism friendly events? The idea is that you have someone whose job is to think that way, because as we've said, not everyone is thinking about those kids because they don't have to. They don't have some of those support needs and challenges at home. They're not necessarily thinking about them when it comes time to plan things. We want to make sure the ESE voices are represented in events, programs, and in our policies within the local level PTAs. The PTA parent rep is not necessarily impacting the school directly. So if it's, if you're like, oh, we have trouble with IEP meetings. Yes, technically the PTA can advocate and help improve that. That's a few steps removed from what this is. This is starting directly with the PTA. But you'll find that those things will cross. They will line up. Now, here is the beauty. You ready for this? If you join the board as an ESE parent, you kind of fill this need, because the idea behind the ESE is to get someone to sit at the table with the decision makers of your local unit PTA. So when they're planning events and planning that they are considering at least communicating to parents so that they know what to expect, giving details so they can, be prepared. And then more importantly, if they can actually make the events, at those quiet spaces, add XYZ, whatever makes that event more inclusive depending on the needs of the school. If you're on the board, then that happens naturally. And that was kind of the step that I took. So as the ESE parent rep at my son's school last year, it was a challenge because I was not invited to the board meetings. I was not part of the decision making. So I was always playing catch up. So they announced, hey, we're doing a school dance. And then I was coming in afterwards saying, I need this information and I'm going to communicate this to the families the best that I can. And I didn't like that. So they had a position opening for the secretary who's in charge of communication. I'm like, I'm going to run for that position. And that's the position I'm in now. So I have to go through people to get permission about how to, because I got pushback. Like you're sending, we don't want to send too many flyers. We don't want to give parents too much information. And as you heard last time, I don't believe that's possible. I think we can overwhelm with one flyer, but we can't communicate too many details about events. And I've gotten no pushback or no complaints this year. And I communicate with people. I'm a talker, right? I communicate like crazy with our parents, but everyone knows what to expect and it helps. But the fun part for me, and this could happen at your school too, maybe not quickly, but we have a board of 7 people and 4 of us are now ESE parents. And that was part of the work that we did last year. And part of the advocacy is basically like trying to not quite a coup, but let's get more of us on the board so that we can control to some degree what's happening. And so now the whole board is really on board with inclusivity and discussing how we make things work for all of our students. And it's wonderful. And as long as we have that kind of representation in our school, we're doing okay. We could be better, but we're doing okay. And that could happen at your school too. Even if it's just you as an ESE parent rep, that can make a big difference moving forward. And I see Leanne's like, I want to do this next year when she starts preschool. Let's do it. And Leanne, I think you filled out the survey. I think I saw your name on that. I'm going to reach out to everyone who did fill that out. I'm going to get through the sessions to talk about how we can start the process to make that happen. Because also last year I spent a lot of time on the phone talking to PTA presidents and principals who are not sure what this program was because they're worried it's a HIPAA violation or whatever. No, that's not what we're doing. This is what it is, and trying to get those things set up. This link here, hcsepta.org/ese-parent-rep, explains the program a little bit more in detail, and it has our playbook. It is out there for you to use. So it has, tools that you'll be using, sample emails to send out to the principal, to staff, what to do on your first day as an ESE parent rep. We're going to add more resources on there, plans of works, sample budget, sample requests, all these kinds of things. From our first session, someone asked about is there like a list of accommodations we should consider? We didn't have one. Now we do. It's on that toolkit. So you can see that on the website. All right. I know that's a lot to take in. So I'm going to go back. There's one other big piece that we're going to talk about, the advocacy part. And so when we talk about advocacy is we want to speak directly to decision makers. That might be a school meeting. It might be some kind of district meeting. It might be a local government meeting, like the Board of County Commissioners. It might be your teacher advisory committee. It might be, it's PTA, it could be all those things. And we talked about that in our first session, how to represent ESE families at PTA meetings. This is kind of along the same goals, but we can go a little bit bigger with this. So school boards, district offices, they may have power to change policies. Lawmakers can change and create laws, right? But they're not going to take action unless they hear from parents. So when you show up to speak, especially if you show up to speak as a group, your message becomes pretty powerful. And change happens when parents push for it. That's what PTA is all about. Things like, I think, kindergarten and lunch at school, these are all PTA initiatives that that came about that we enjoy because parents fought for it. And so that was not on purpose. There we go. So when we talk about advocacy and speaking out, there's a couple tips you can see on the screen. So one, we want to start with defining our goals. So before you speak at a meeting, you want to be clear about what you're asking for. So are we looking to increase ABA access in schools? That's a behavioral therapy. Are we trying to get more consistent accommodations? Do we need the district to create a policy? Those might be goals that we have, depending on the meeting. If it's a local governing body, your goal might be to not get the zone, the land across from the school zone for commercial. So they're not putting a business in on a street where kids are walking to school. It might be just getting, again, access to therapy in classrooms. It also helps to know the laws. You want to research existing policies, know your under IDEA, state and local laws. The big thing for that is when you understand the laws and the rules, it gives you a bit more power to talk about those things. If you just come and say, we need this, well, we already have that. Or we need this, and here's the law, but we're not getting it. That holds a little bit more powerful. So like IDEA, if you're not familiar, Individuals with Disability Education Act. So students with disabilities are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. That's something that if you know what that means, when you come in and argue, hey, we're not getting these accommodations, this is violating IDEA, right? You can have that kind of language. Like Florida has a law that has to deal with ABA therapy and special education services in schools, but it's kind of vague. And so school districts kind of do different things with it. Create a community. So when you can speak as a united front, that has power. One person speaking, that's great. Someone needs to do it, but when you have more people doing it, it makes a huge difference. And that's why I like to call the ESE community as opposed to a committee. You're building a support network. And again, the more voices you have, the greater the influence. And then ultimately, building relationships. So one of the mistakes that we often make in advocacy is we come in demanding things right from the get-go. And sometimes that is what needs to happen. And again, we want to define our goals. We want to ask directly. We want to propose solutions. But at the same time, we want to be building relationships with those people, school board members, district officials. You want to find allies. You want to prove yourself as a reliable and informed voice, not just someone complaining, but someone who's there to actually find solutions and make things better, right? That's what we want to do. And so when you join some of these groups, that gives you easy access to build those relationships. Remember I talked about the Superintendent's Advisory Council? Through that, you would have an opportunity, again, with Shannon Lesbrance, ESE Director for the district. Van Ayers is typically at the last meeting, and he usually comes to one or two other meetings just to like make an appearance. And he gets to see you. And it's not a big group. We're talking 15 people in our biggest meetings. So you're sitting at a table with some of these people who are kind of, high up. We have school board members who come to those. Even within PTA, the events that we do and the outreach that we do and the programs that we run, you'll get a chance to meet some of these people. And that more face time you have and more time you can show yourself as not just someone who's there complaining, but you are taking action to improve schools. You're partnering with the school district or with the entity that you're working with. Going to help. That makes a big difference. So again, we can't just go in and demand things. We can, but we also want to build that relationship. That makes it much easier when the time comes. So we talked about speaking up at meetings. This is kind of a recap of that first meeting, but it's a little bit, because this applies to more than PTA. So if you can, coordinate parents with their testimonies. Now, if it's a school board meeting, you're going into problems because they always have those meetings during the workday and people may not be able to come. So you can have them write what they want to say and someone else can read it. Someone who can come to that meeting can read it for them. If you can coordinate multiple people at once, it makes a big difference. Stay focused on your goal, right? Stay on message, be respectful, focus on solutions, stay calm and professional, even if you get pushback. So I can tell, I went and spoke in August at the Board of County Commissioners meeting. They were trying to take the millage off of the ballot. And so a group of people went to just encourage them. No, you're actually not allowed to do that. And the judges agreed. Both times it went to court. And we argued that it's a democracy. Like, let people decide. If they don't want to vote for if they don't want the millage to pass, they'll vote no. You're trying to keep that off of the ballot. And I went and I spoke, and the four on party lines, the commissioners didn't even look at me, didn't even put their head up. I had no interest in what I was saying. And several of those, I talked to their staffers on the phone before that. That wasn't necessarily pushback, but it was kind of like, I mean, you could feel it. They didn't care. And you could find yourself wanting to say something snarky or whatever. You want to avoid that. You can be firm, but we want to be respectful. We do want to ask for specific changes. Because remember, advocacy isn't just about sharing concerns, it's about getting results. And that doesn't mean you have to know the answer. I know someone that I worked with years ago used to say, don't bring me a problem unless you can bring 3 solutions. And I said, that's kind of dumb. I get what you're trying to say is don't just bring problems, but there may be a problem that I don't know how to solve. So I'm not supposed to bring it to your attention because I don't understand all the possibilities. This seems unfair. But it does mean, just don't go and complain. And we want to keep the pressure on. So follow up after the meetings. Ask about the next steps. Because sometimes they'll tell you, we're going to look into that and get back to you. And they don't. Sometimes they're going to tell you they're going to do this. And they don't. And it may be because they don't want to. It might be because they just forget or because they're still working on it. So when you have that follow up, keep the pressure on. Hey, I'm not going anywhere. So we need you to take action or at least, get back to me on what we're talking about. So I want to give you a case study. This is a thing that actually happened. And I love it. So we're going to take a look at this advocacy in action. So last year, the Hillsborough County Public Schools, they changed the private instruction personnel procedure. So the PIP, I'm going to call it the PIP. This is a document that you would fill out if you wanted to have like speech, OT, or physical therapy, ABA therapy during school. So it's private instruction, which means you're paying for it, whether it's through insurance, through Medicaid, Medicare, or whatever, or you're paying out of pocket. But you want to have this happen at school. So we're not talking about the school provided speech. We're talking about a private company you're bringing in. And it was like a 4-page document. It was pretty simple language. And it helps students get access to some of these supports. Now, there was pushback because the policies weren't consistent across the school district. And so they created a new PIP this last summer. And it was 11 pages. It was very complex, full of legalese. It was very intimidating. And there were some things in there that, I'm not a lawyer, and reading it, I was like, this is kind of scary. I don't know how I feel about this. So that was a big issue, especially because it came out like right before school started. So parents who had already had some kind of private instruction coming into the school were now having to go through this new process, which was going to delay access to the services when school started. And parents were rightfully kind of upset and scared, right? And so Project ABA Rights, we've talked about them as well. It's an organization that helped form the HC SEPTA. With HC SEPTA and even some of the council PTA, we organized parents to speak at a school board meeting in August. Now, what was special about this meeting, it was the night the school board was set to approve the district's ESE plan and that goes to the Florida State Department of Education. This is renewed every 3 years, and it was time to renew it. So the plan was proposed, and typically the school board would just say, yeah, that's cool. During public comments, 13 people spoke. 11 of them were with our groups. The other ones, someone complained about like newspapers or windmills. There's always someone who spouts something that's kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then a couple other issues that came up. We even had someone who wasn't part of our group that heard what we said, and they said, I want to talk about something else, but I'm also going to mention what they said because I feel what they're saying. And basically what each person who spoke of those 11 people, they had something different to say, but the common theme was, you're putting together a packet of ESE policies and you have not talked to any parents about it. That's a problem. Like, you're making decisions without including us, and we're a part of this team. And so the school board, they said, we're not going to vote on this tonight because clearly, the parents took up a majority of the time in public comments to tell us that they're not happy about how this is going. We're not going to vote on this until you meet with those parents and hear what they have to say. So that was a great start. And so then they set up a meeting. And so a group of us, representatives from each kind of group have been going. We've met, I think, 4 times now with a team of people from the district to talk about this PIP. Now, it is not perfect, but my goodness, it is so much better than it was. And I'll be clear, we're not arguing like the legal side of things. We're not trying to get contracts changed. We're not trying to represent all the parents in the county. We were not elected or selected to do that. What we've advocated for is simpler language, an easier process, a well-defined process, and consistent policies. And most of that is the current PIP is much, much better than what it was. And you can see on the picture on the right there, this is from our last meeting. You can see there's I think that's Sharon on the picture there. And then the other picture is like the room that we're in. We even have like a moderator who comes. It's really cool. But we have, at this point, this was in February, 440 students are receiving services from private instruction. So they're getting ABA, they're getting speech, OT or PT or something during school time, which is huge because that number was not as high at the beginning of the year when everyone was scared of this. So that's how this could work. Now, I don't want to promise that you could just show up to a meeting and you're going to get change right away. Project ABA Rights had been talking at school board meetings for a year before they could get this meeting. They kept being told they would get a meeting, but they never got one. Part of it was timing, but it was also gathering enough people at once to make a big enough deal that they had to listen. And there are other issues out there that people are working the same way. I talked to a mom whose kid is very young, has a specialized diet, and is fed through a gastrointestinal tube. So they have to like mix the food up, and the nurse at the school does it. But because it's a specialized diet, the school doesn't want to do it. So they're just like not feeding the kid. And we spoke about this at length, and they've had meetings with people at the district and made their complaints. Nothing's happening. And after talking like, hey, are there other people out there like you? And they found, it's not a big group, but they found a group. They're on the news and starting to get some movement. Maybe not quite as well. Said ABA rights. It took over a year to get the meeting, and now we're 2 years in before we got a PIP in a good spot. But things like that can happen. And so you may feel like you're dealing with an issue at your school or in the county or things like that. You may find other parents have that exact same problem. The challenge is that we don't know who else is out there. You can't go to the school and ask for a list of ESE students. That's not a thing. You can't do that. And if they do, like, this is super unethical and violates the law, right? But when you can start building this community by being in leadership, by telling your story, by getting the word out there, you'll find other people. You can also do these kinds of things. I mean, Project ABA Rights started with 3 parents around a kitchen table worried about getting access to support in the classroom. Now there are over 2,000 members. One of the founders of that group has been asked to speak at different conferences, meets with school board members. And if you ask her, she's like, I never signed up for this, but this is what was necessary to help my kid. And once I helped my kid, I realized I couldn't stop. And you're going to find the same thing can happen for you and your concerns as well. So we're nearing the end here. I'm going to encourage you to take the next step, whatever that might be for you. Remember, advocacy and leadership go hand in hand. It's so much easier to advocate when you're in a leadership role. And when you've built a relationship with people in charge, they go hand in hand so much better. So when ESC families are leading, schools don't really have a choice but to be inclusive. And when you can build that leverage, because the school now depends on you as a main volunteer, as a PTA board member, as a advisory committee member, or whatever it might be, it's much easier because you've got the ear of the people who make those decisions. And dare I say, we don't do it for this reason, but could your kid find a little more favor as well? It could happen. Again, we want to benefit all of our kids, but sometimes that privilege, we're not going to turn it away. We can acknowledge it without, completely saying no, as long as we're being equitable, right? That's the key. But we can make all these things happen together. So what can you do? What would be the next step for you? Sign up for the PSP class. In fact, you can still sign up for the one that is currently going on. You've missed a couple of sessions. You won't get a certificate, but you can attend the rest of the sessions if you wanted. There's I think a Tuesday afternoon, and there's, I think, a Wednesday evening. You'd have to double check, but they'll have new ones probably next year. So sign up for the class. It's very informational. It's wonderful. Inquire about your school's advisory committee. Ask your principal, ask your teacher. When do they meet? Can I come? Come to the next Superintendent Advisory Council meeting, April 11th. Go to that. There's a websites at the end on the last slide. See, I forget where it's going to be, but go to that meeting. Come in May. Superintendent will be there. Here are our reports. We're going to do the reports from all our committees. You can hear about what's going on. And I would love it if you came and you said, like, I'm here because of the workshops from the ESC Parent Rep program. I'm here because of that. That would make us look good. So nothing wrong with that. Maybe you want to speak at your next PTA meeting or school board meeting, etc. You can find all those. There'll be a link at the end, but those should be online, at least school board meetings. Your PTA meetings, hopefully they have those advertised somewhere, or just ask. And we talked about it, and if you're don't remember or not sure, our YouTube page, which is on our website, HC SEPTA, you can click on the social media link that has that session. You can go back and say, okay, how do I speak up for ESC families? Step into PTA leadership. I'm telling you, join a committee, do something. And you may think, I don't have a lot of time. That's the beauty of PA, is you don't necessarily have to give all of your time. It is typically, there's things available for people who have a few minutes up to full time, right? Whatever available. But the big thing is, let's get these ESC parent rep programs in more of our schools, because that is going to make a huge difference. And it's going to build these communities within our schools. And the idea behind HC SEPTA was to be a connection of these kinds of parent reps and parent communities, so that we can come together and we can share resources, and we can share solutions, and we can talk about what's working and what's not, and we can share our challenges, and we can just go on this journey together, because we all know, especially as an ESC parent, that your network is one of the most important things that you have, and we want to build that. We want to build that for others as well. So here is a whole bunch of links. I don't believe you can click on them, and I apologize. I did not make QR codes for all of these this time. There's just too many. And Amy's posting those now, so thank you. Most of these are pretty easy, or you can, if you just do a search, you'll find them. But you got links here for HC SEPTA, the PTA, Superintendent's Advisory Council, PSP, Project ABA Rights, school board meetings. Another organization that's really a good one for training for advocacy is Families for Strong Public Schools. So check them out, and they have a ton of things you can sign up for their mailing list and do those. So that is it. We went through this, I'd say pretty quick, but a little longer than I expected, but this is good stuff. And I get really excited, because the more of us who step into leadership, the bigger impact that we're going to have. And leadership doesn't mean you have to be president. It just means you have to be present there, building that relationship.